Hello and welcome to the programme which looks at the Holy Land. I am Paul Calvert. Psalm 128 verse 1 from the New King James Bible says this: Blessed is everyone who fears the Lord, who walks in his ways. I'm with Andy Ure, who was originally born in Scotland but moved to South Africa. What was life like for you in South Africa, and when did you move to South Africa?
So we moved to South Africa in 1968, and I was there from 68 to 77 for the first time. And growing up in South Africa back then, it was very much an adventure, outdoor life, horses, tree houses, and I wasn't really aware of anything of the system that we lived under at that period of time. I started to become more aware of it probably when I was maybe about 8 or 9, because it just seemed normal. Everybody had maids, everybody had garden boys, and they lived in a different part of the land to us, but it was normal to us growing up that just seemed to be the way it was. And I suppose when you're in a country where everyone is separated and you have nothing to compare it to, you think that's normal. So growing up in the first period, up until about the age of 10, to me that seemed normal.
And when did you become aware of actually something called apartheid? And when you went to school, were you separated from white people and black people? Did you just go to an all-white school?
So the schools were all white. The buses were all white. You couldn't have blacks and whites sitting in the same part of the bus. Some of the buses, the blacks were allowed to sit at the back. So everything was separated. The beaches were separate. You couldn't have blacks on a white beach. You couldn't have, even the benches had signs on them saying whites only. The toilets, public toilets, would say whites only. Restaurants, whites only. Pubs, whites only. Cinemas, whites only. So everything was separated, and black people and colored people could not live in the neighborhoods that white people lived in. So you had separate neighborhoods for the different races.
Could you actually just go out on the street and play together, and the black people come and just say, well, I want to play with him, he's my friend?
No, it didn't happen, because it was so ingrained that when you were growing up, they were different to us. In fact, we were taught that they were inferior to us. So we never really had black friends if we could help it as children. However, on the farm where I grew up, all my friends were pretty much black, because our nearest neighbors were like 5 miles away. And so the workers who worked on the farms, they lived in what they called a kraal, which was a separate kind of place, fenced off, where they had their huts, and they lived there, they cooked there, they slept there, and they obviously had their families there, and their children would obviously become workers on the farms as well. So those children we called them pequenins, which basically means small ones. And we used to play with them because there was no one else for us to play with.
But did you have a sense that you were better than them when you played with them?
We had a sense that we were different to them. And we were led to believe that we were better than them, yeah.
Did you understand and know why there was apartheid?
Absolutely not, no. As a child, you kind of it's what you grow up in, and it seems to be the norm. Now, my family came from the UK, and they just assimilated into that way of life as if it was normal. And they took it on as if it was normal, because that was the norm at the time. So if you were going to live in South Africa and you were going to prosper in South Africa, you got on with how things were.
Did this ideology even get into the church as well?
The church was completely separate. There were black churches and white churches. The two did not mix.
What would happen if a black person came into a white person's church?
He would be asked to leave.
So there was real separation everywhere.
It was completely separate. There was no integration at all. So you never had black doctors, you never had black nurses, you never had black judges or policemen or anything who would have any say over a white person. It was completely dominated. So the police force was completely white. The army was white. Everything, the hospitals, the doctors, everything, the judicial system, there was no blacks involved in it.
Now, Nelson Mandela became someone who fought against this. How did the white people see Nelson Mandela?
The white people saw Nelson Mandela as a terrorist. That's what they labeled him as. And, I mean, when there were conflicts and confrontations, people did die. So people would have considered that an act of terrorism back then.
Were there people who were actually white people who are actually trying to fight this system?
There were white people who were trying to fight the system. Many of them had to flee the country because when they fought the system, that made them a target and their lives were in danger. They would be assassinated if they could get away with it.
So when did you realize when apartheid was wrong?
Paul, what happened was my father and I, we struggled to get on, and I was like a troubled school kid. In school, I was failing terribly. So my dad sent me to a college in Cape Town called Boston House College, which was not state-run. It was private. And so in that school, there were blacks, there were coloreds, there were Indians, there were Chinese, there were whites, all different races. In South Africa, you only had white people in the schools. You didn't have Indians, you didn't have coloreds, you didn't even have Chinese in your school. They were all separated. So here I was in a class with mixed races for the first time, and I started to realize these people are super intelligent. These people who we were told were inferior to us are just as smart as us. And I started to make friends with them. And I would go into the townships and visit them in their homes. And their homes were beautiful. They were, some of them were like mansions because their parents were successful businessmen, but they weren't allowed to live in a white suburb. So they built their fancy house in a squatter camp. And I would go into these places and realize something's wrong with this picture. These people are successful. These people are capable. They're not inferior to us. And that's when I started to realize the evil of apartheid and how it was a system that was being enforced by a government that didn't want its culture, I suppose, to be, as they saw it, watered down and diluted. So they were doing everything they could to protect it, but it was wicked, it was evil, and it was oppressing people and preventing them, who were way more capable than a lot of white people were, from succeeding. It was a system that was oppressing them and holding them back. And I realized that when I started to have colored friends and black friends and would go into their townships and visit them. And it changed my worldview, which also put me at odds with my own family. Because I would come back and say, well, actually, it's wrong the way you're treating these people. And they would tell me to shut up. Because here's one of the things. It was advantageous for the people in South Africa who were on the other side of the apartheid, in other words, the white folk. It was advantageous for them because it gave them a lifestyle that many in the West would envy. But it was at the cost of other people for them to have that, standard of living.
How did apartheid end?
Well, apartheid ended when F.W. de Klerk became the president of South Africa, or the prime minister. I don't know, they changed at some stage from president or prime minister to president. He became the leader of South Africa. And he said that as a Christian, he could not go along with it. So he began the process of trying to undo the system and releasing Mandela, and allowed the first elections, free elections, to take place. And now he claims that that's because, as a believer, and according to the scriptures, he understood the system that he was leading was not of God. So he wanted to do something about it. He faced great opposition, but he succeeded in releasing Nelson Mandela and allowing free elections for the first time in South Africa.
Now you're here today in Israel, and you've lived under apartheid, and people say, Israel is an apartheid state. As someone who's actually lived under apartheid, what would you say to them?
Well, living in Israel and having been to Israel before, and having grown up for 22 years in an apartheid state, and even having done my national service while we were still at war with the ANC and Russia and Cuba coming over our borders, we know what it's like to be in an apartheid state, which I explained. It was complete separation. The two were not allowed to mix. You couldn't have intermarriage or anything like that whatsoever. So in Israel, there's no such thing. People can intermarry. You have Arabs, you have Jews living in the same neighborhoods. Some of them don't, but they can live in the same neighborhoods. You have Arab doctors, you have Arab police, you have Arab IDF soldiers. It's integrated. They're not separated. You can go to a cinema and a restaurant, and there's no separation like we had growing up. You can get on the same bus, and you will have Jews, Arabs, and Gentiles on the same bus. You couldn't have that when I was growing up in South Africa.
So how does that make you feel when you hear, well, Israel's an apartheid state?
It makes me laugh, and at the same time it also makes me upset because it's a lie. It's a blatant lie. But it suits a narrative. It suits a narrative that is trying to undermine Israel and trying to paint them as, a criminal almost, as a pariah state. And it couldn't be further from the truth, because just yesterday I had a friend in here with me who's an Arab, and here we are in Israel, and we are working together to go and reach people and help the body of Christ, whether they're Jews, whether they're Arabs, whether they're Gentiles. We're here working together in Israel for the sake of Christ.
Now, you look at Jerusalem, for instance, you've got East Jerusalem and West Jerusalem. East Jerusalem's more of an Arab area. West Jerusalem is more of a Jewish area. Now, they can mix, can't they? A Jew can go into the Arab area and an Arab can go into the Jewish area. They may be separated in the sense, well, we live in the Arab community or we live in the Jewish community, but both can go backwards and forwards.
Correct. They can, and in fact, we walked through both communities, and we were free to walk through both communities. But having grown up in South Africa, if I had walked through the wrong community as a white young man, my life would have been in danger. I'll tell you a story. When I was in the army, I caught a train. And that train, I fell asleep on that train. And that train came to a stop in the middle of a township. And there was no other train out. I was stuck there that night. I wasn't a Christian. I cried out. I was like, what am I going to do? And a black colored man, hid me because he said, they will kill you. And after he hid me, they came and they questioned him, and they said, where is that white man? We're going to kill him. But he hid me in an old burnt-out Volkswagen Kombi. And I hid in the engine compartment and spent the entire night in there. If I had made a noise and they discovered me, I would not be here today having this interview with you. That's how dangerous it was. The two could not mix together.
I think we have to be fair when we talk about apartheid. There is a sense of separation in some ways because we have Judea and Samaria, or what people call the West Bank, where there's a wall built round and the Palestinians are behind that wall. Would you say that was apartheid?
My question would be, why was that wall built? From what I can see and understand, that wall was built because people were being attacked, people were being killed. The wall has been built not to separate them. Well, I suppose it is. It's to stop attacks from coming in and killing Israelis. And I don't know if I would call it apartheid. I would call it a defensive mechanism. And, if they weren't attacking the Israelis, there wouldn't be a wall.
So actually, with that as well, we do know that there are Palestinians behind that wall who actually get permissions to come and work in Israel.
That's right, yeah. So these people come, they earn a living and they get a good living, and then they can go back into their territory where actually the cost of living is a lot better than it is in Israel. So they win both ways.
You can actually pay cheaper rents by living in the Palestinian area, coming to work into Israel and getting an Israeli wage and taking that back and live as a king.
Yeah. And that's what we see happening here. So the two are so different. South Africa was completely different. The two communities were separated by law, and if they mixed, you would go to jail. So if a white man wanted to marry a black woman, or a black woman or a black man wanted to marry a white woman, and they were found out to be having a relationship, it would be a criminal thing that was happening. Here, Arabs and Israelis get married. And there's a couple that I know, Sergio and Rhoda. He's a Messianic Jewish man, and Rhoda is an Arab. And they're married. And the thing that makes it work is they are one new man in Christ. And so, but they're allowed to get married. They're not told you can't get married because you're Arab and you're Israeli. But in South Africa, that was illegal. So there's no apartheid, there's no separation. If Arabs and Israelis want to get married, or Jews and Arabs want to get married, they can get married here.
And even Palestinian can actually marry an Israeli.
Yeah. So it's a fallacy that there is apartheid in Israel. Having grown up in an apartheid state for 22 years, and even having to go do national service there for 2 years, and realizing in the army, it was all white. You couldn't have, because they wouldn't trust a black person to be in the army because they were seen as the enemy. But here in Israel, you've got Arabs in the army, you've got Jews in the army, you've got, Christians in the army. They're all together under the one flag of Israel because they're Israelis. They're not separate.
What is the answer today for this whole situation, this conflict between Palestinians and Israelis?
The only way I can see it, and I mentioned that couple, was Sergio and Rhoda. They actually are believers in Yeshua. They're Christians. They're one new man. And they go around saying, look, Arabs and Jews are not getting on in general. But we, as a couple, we are married, we thrive together, and what makes it work? Jesus. Yeshua makes it work. We are recreated. We are one new man. And so the answer is actually that people embrace Yeshua and then they understand it's not about our race. It's not about being Arab or Jewish or Palestinian or Israeli. It's about being a new creation in him.
Well, Andy, thank you very much for sharing today.
Thank you very much, Paul. I appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us today. Pray that God will move by his mighty power in the Holy Land and bring his peace.